Well, welcome back to the morning show here on Organised News. It's time now to take a look at the top stories that made headlines across the globe on the week that was. And we'll start with Nigeria's Organised Labour, which says it's suspending a strike that it embarked on within a week for a period of 1 week, which was to create the necessary conditions for a seamless negotiation with the federal government's delegation. The twin labor unions, consisting of the Nigerian Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress, appeal to Nigerians to understand the position they have taken in the dispute with the government. The Labour leaders made their feelings known after a joint National Executive Council meeting of the two bodies. Arise correspondent Punariam Benjamin reports.
The NLC and TUC's decision to suspend its strike for 1 week comes as a relief to many Nigerians. The strike action, which ended on day 2, follows a temporary agreement by the two labour centres, NLC and TUC, to resume talks with the federal government. There has been controversy between the government's offer of 60,000 naira and the Labour's request for 494,000 naira. But some citizens in Abuja think the decision to suspend the strike is coming too early, while others say it is a great step.
I'm not happy. I feel that the labor unions should do more than this for the staff. Everybody is disappointed right now because the strike just started and then the conditions, to me, I feel that they are not met. What government should do is they should look at the conditions that these unions are given. Now, if they cannot afford to pay the 400 and something thousand, they should bring it to at least a reasonable amount of money. If they are considering the private sectors, it is understandable. But let it be at least something slightly above what they are offering, 60,000.
They shouldn't have called off. They should have remained resolute and continue the strike. We have the kind of government who doesn't listen until when there's things like strike. So if we're Labour, I would want to continue the strike until when the government do what they are supposed to do.
Well, it's a sign of relief to some extent, but we hear that they have not actually fully resolved the issue. So going forward, we hope that since they have accepted to call off the strike, going forward they might be able to resolve and then suspend the strike indefinitely.
I would say it is timely in the sense that incessant strike is not, it doesn't augur well for development, even for the government and the citizenry. So calling off the strike, I think is the ideal thing. But I pray that this calling of the strike will augur way for the civil servant and even the government.
Now that the labour unions and the government are returning to the negotiating table, Nigerians will be hoping to see that whatever decision reached will better the lives of many Nigerians. Punariam Benjamin, Arise News.
Labour strike earlier this week definitely took Nigerians for, I would say, a very intense discussion on what our minimum wage should be, what a living wage is. The calling off the strike in such quick succession to the beginning of the strike, I think, was a shock for all involved. However, now the federal government has announced in the last 12 hours, I believe, that they are coming out with a suggestion of 62,000 naira.
So they added 2,000.
They added 2,000 naira to the 60,000.
What did they call that? 2,000? Urgent 2,000.
Urgent 2,000.
My daily 2K.
Your daily 2K, yes. Which does seem like a bit of a slap in the face on Labour. It seems like a slap in the face to Nigerians who are actually crying out that with food inflation, with inflationary pressures, that the living wage needs to be significantly higher than 60,000. Now, the governors have also come back and said that they cannot afford a 60,000 naira minimum wage. I believe the governors are suggesting 57,000 naira. So, I mean, where do you guys think this is going?
There's a lot to unpack with this, and just to even start off with what you said about calling off the strike. I remember I was watching an interview with Festus Osifo, and he said they haven't called off the strike; they've only relaxed it a little bit because of they're seeing how it's affected the nation. I mean, in just those in a couple of days, we saw that airlines couldn't travel. We saw that the Super Eagles were stuck. They had the match with Bafana yesterday, and they were stuck. And even the Nigeria's domestic cargo sector took a 7 billion naira hit in during the 2-day strike. So we could see everything that came out of it. Well, I think what really strikes me first and foremost is after all of this back and forth, I think it was on Wednesday, we saw that meeting that was called by the president with all the stakeholders on the side of the federal government. We had the Minister of Budget and National Planning, Minister of Information, Minister of Finance, Minister of Labour, even the CEO of the NNPCL, the Chief of Staff, and the Secretary to the federal government have a meeting and say, okay, go back, Waledun, go back and do these calculations based off of the 494 that was initially suggested. That would be about 3 trillion naira, which this current administration cannot afford. So go back. They were keeping that figure very tightly. So for all of that back and forth to now come back and say, okay, we're going to add an extra 2,000 naira, I'm not going to lie, I am very, very disappointed. And I'm wondering what's going to happen now next, because what we're hearing, that the figure that the NLC might be comfortable with would be about 90 to 100,000 naira. But let's even put that aside. When we look at the body language, we've spoken about the Oronsaye report multiple times on this same platform, and the fact that there's this appeal for the cost of governance. Now you're coming back and saying that you can't afford it. We're hearing from the national governors, from the Nigerian governors forums that they cannot afford it. The National Assembly takes a total of 344 billion. How about the National Assembly also buckles up as well and says, okay, we know that we can't afford this. Let us cut 100 or 150 billion. I was watching a video yesterday where the secretary to the federal so the federal government was saying that, he has 4 drivers and he won't be able to pay his 4 drivers 100K each. Maybe he'll be happy with this. He'll be able to pay them, what's 120, 240 this time around. And that just speaks to the disconnect between those in power.
Also, he can't afford 4 drivers, and he should not have 4 drivers.
Exactly.
But I mean, I would find it very strange if a former governor, former senator, and now secretary to the federal government really cannot afford to pay his drivers that amount of money. It does come to talk about prioritizing and also what you think human beings deserve, right? If you cannot afford to pay your drivers that money, then maybe you can't afford to send your children to certain schools, or maybe you can't afford to wear certain watches or certain shoes. Yes. However, we see that you are prioritizing certain things over the other. We're talking about human beings who are going hungry. Children are dying of malnutrition in some areas 100% more than they were this time last year. So this is a serious crisis. It's not something to joke about. It's not something, we speak a lot about our leaders needing to be more sensitive, more empathetic, and more connected to the plight of Nigerians. Because again, if you are saying you cannot afford to pay 4 drivers 100K a month, that means you're paying them less now. That means on your driver who probably has a family of his own, on his salary, he can't afford a bag of rice and a chicken and 1 crate of eggs a month.
And let's not even forget that the National Assembly also receives a hardship allowance. I don't understand how you're receiving a hardship allowance while the people that are actually going through the hardship are getting the grunt of the deal. But as I finalize, I think what really stands out for me is the questions about productivity. Fine, all of these things can happen. There's going to be a lot of back and forth. Who knows what the NLC is going to say to this 62,000 naira, if they're going to accept it or not. But on the other end, we need to think about productivity. If it exists, we need to start to figure out how to create an enabling environment, the conditions of the workers, the welfare, the strengthening of the naira, so that even if they even say it's 100,000 or it's 500,000, if the purchasing power of the naira is still where it is, we're going to find ourselves back in this same position 5 years from now.
Okay, I mean, well said, on both sides, starting with the SGF, who has not been heard in almost 1 year plus that has been there, but all of a sudden he's talking about his 4 drivers. I would have thought that he was being cheeky, but the weight of what he said, shows gross insensitivity, if not irresponsibility. I mean, for a former 2-term governor, a former senator, all the 4 drivers that he's talking about, which one of them is he paying from his pocket? And therefore, the argument will be that if it is the government that is paying them, what level of drivers is he using? Even in the civil service, if you enter the civil service, every 3 years there's an exam that raises, your salary if you pass. Is it therefore saying that the people that is engaging as drivers are perpetually below 30 and they are never promoted, and therefore they don't earn anything additional? They only stay with minimum wage. How come his own driver, is basically on the minimum wage? I think that what the SGF said represents the warped thinking of many in our political class, and the message that I think that sends to anybody struggling is that whatever they are doing to stay out of poverty legitimately, they should take it seriously.
Yes.
Because the world in general and the political class in Nigeria, it seems obviously, does not care about the poor and the working class. And we're talking working class when we're discussing the minimum wage. I was not surprised that the federal government came up with 62. They were, they threw the kite when they said that, okay, fine, you don't want 60, we will add to the 60. I mean, anybody that will pay 70 will not say that he will add to 60. Yeah. So it will have been anything between 60.5 to maybe 69. It was not going to go, beyond 70. But I think it is understandable. What I personally am not getting is the sort of explanation that would justify, either from the side of the federal government or the side of the governors, why you are sticking to a certain, amount. You can't just say that it is not sustainable or you can't pay it. How are we able to pay for the political class, including the lawmakers? I'm not, limiting it to just the federal lawmakers. I'm saying that across states.
Yes.
I'm saying that across local government, anybody who's working for government, who's getting an official car from government, including the SGF who's getting pension from Benue State. How are we able to afford it if you can't pay, a worker a fairly living wage? Maybe we are not able to pay a living wage, but the reason why we are unable to pay a living wage should be the reason why we shouldn't be able to afford two houses of assembly to start with. Should be why the president of the country and all elected officials shouldn't be driving the SUVs that they are driving, and should borrow a leaf from Babangida the other time that said that let's go back to the vehicles that were being assembled in Nigeria. And that's why everybody was driving Peugeot. So if you stay with Peugeot, stay with GAC that is being assembled in Nigeria, stay with Innocent, stay with, the other one, the Meccano people, for example, do you know how much we'll be saving from importing vehicles from Japan and Germany, importing tires, etc.? So the argument has to be properly dimensioned. But in all this, I think that the Labour chaps did very well with what they have done. It's a different argument to go into the shutting down of the grid or not the grid, I mean, desperate situations. I believe that's what the Labour people are thinking, these are desperate measures, measures. And if you say that, so many people unfortunately died while the grid was shut down, what happened to the 7 times that the grid had been shut down, in all those places? Who's responsible for the deaths in the hospitals and for businesses that were lost, because the government failed to do what it was meant to do? So I hope that I had Murik saying that don't resume the strike on the eve of Salah. It looks to me like something interesting will happen from the Labour camp, particularly after summer. Will they, capitulate to what the government has said? I do not think that 62 is fair. But of course, if they are going to accept, there must be conditions attached. The conversation should not stop.
I wonder, before we move on to the next story, because, there's this conversation about even the 30,000 that the NLC is trying to move away from. Of course, in certain states, they've not been able to pay it. And the continuity, if they accept this 60 or 62,000, the governors in certain states, do you think that maybe if you look at it on a subnational level, where different governors, like look at what happened in Edo State, for example, where, the Godwin Obaseki said, this is what we can afford. We can can do 70,000. And without any of this noise that is happening outside, let's focus on what we have. We've spoken about the conversation about fuel subsidy, where we now know that the allocation where that they used to receive has now been doubled because they are no longer paying for fuel subsidy. What's being done with that money is to make sure that they pay the workers. I think at this point, even though there's a national call for labor to strike, the different governors at their different levels should start to think about what they can afford and start to not just wait for.
It's about the National Minimum Wage Act, and it's an important point that you raise so that we quickly, touch on this before we go. It wasn't, like this in the past. I recall that when I think it was when Obasanjo was leaving as head of state and handing over, to the. No, not as president, as head of state at that time. At a time that minimum wage of 7,500 was being proposed. What was debated was that 7,500 minimum wage should be for the federal workers, Lagos State, and oil-producing states. Maybe you can, at this point, throw in Kano and Kaduna to an extent. For the other states that were non-oil producing states, it was 5,500 that was recommended. So I agree that not all states will be able to pay the same thing. But you can't come and sit down on the same table with Godwin Obaseki and say that, you can't pay beyond. How is Obaseki able to pay 70,000?
Exactly.
How has Lagos State been able to pay 40 and then the 30,000, wage, allowance? Of course, Lagos can do better than Obaseki, but do you expect Governor Sanwo-Olu to say, we are going to do it?
I mean, he has increased, especially like for health workers.
Absolutely.
Now, there are certain segments in Lagos State that do earn above the minimum wage. Yeah. And again, the issue here is that they always knew it was going to expire. They needed to have been proactive. They shouldn't. Why is it now that Wale Edun is coming up with a formula? What was going on for the last year?
How come we do not know how much he proposed? Where did the 105,000 come from? And Wale Edun is not speaking. Anytime he comes up with a proposal, somebody comes to deny and say that's not what he meant. Allow him to say his mind. For crying out loud.
All right, then. We're going to continue to keep tabs on this story. But let's move on now to our next story. Nigerian senators were this week polarized over a bill that seeks to legislate against open grazing in Nigeria. The bill also seeks to establish a national Animal Husbandry and Ranches Commission as the only solution to end perennial clashes between farmers and herders in the country. Arise correspondent Omo Bazwaye tells us more.
The endless conflict for land resources between farmers and herders in Nigeria has been a major source of concern, with more than 4,000 people killed in the country since 2016, according to reports. Ebibai Senator Titus Zam from Benue State is proposing ranching as a sole viable alternative for cattle breeding to end herder-farmer clashes nationwide.
My distinguished colleagues, now is the time to bring about a law to stop open grazing. It is old-fashioned, hazardous, burdensome, and must be discarded. The bill therefore proposes ranching as the only viable alternative for cattle breeding in Nigeria.
The proposition is, however, kicked against by some northern senators who believe restraining herders to their state of origin violates their constitutional right to freedom of movement.
I'm against the idea of restricting movement of Nigerians from one state to another.
No, that would not happen.
Right now, citizens of Nigeria are allowed to move from one state to another to establish business without any hindrance whatsoever.
It affects everywhere in Nigeria.
Yes.
Nobody can restrict
pastoralists
movement.
and citizens of Nigeria, they can move to north central, northwest, northeast, south, and establish their business without
they can do so, but not with AK-47.
These Fulanis are Nigerians. They don't even benefit anything from government. They don't enjoy schools. They don't enjoy hospitals. They don't enjoy any roads. All the housing programs done by government, and they don't enjoy them, nothing. So to just throw them away like that because they happen to come from they are assumed to have come from states that may not have even enough water, enough grazing area. And you say you can only be done in that state. I think it's not going to work.
The bill eventually scaled second reading despite strong push by some of the northern senators to step it down on grounds that it is discriminatory and against ECOWAS protocol.
As we consider this,
I also want us to look at the Land Use Act as an impediment to this particular very wonderful bill to ensure that we can get and put to rest this matter of header farmer clash.
Apart from the Constitution, like Senator Alero said, the ECOWAS protocol is part of the problem that we have. You can quote the Constitution, but what about the ECOWAS protocol? It allows you to move anywhere with your business. It allows you to move anywhere with your cows. So in getting towards realizing this, you must be very conscious of your laws in the nation, because you are not making a law for your state.
President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, appealed to senators to allow the bill go for a public hearing, where proposals in the bill, including amending the Land Use Act, can be fine-tuned. A majority voice vote passed the bill for a second reading and subsequently referred it to the Joint Committee on Agriculture, Trade, Investment and Legal Services to be reported back within 4 weeks. Omo Bazwai, Rise News.
Well, there you have it, the anti-open grazing bill that seems to be splitting the Senate. If enacted, this bill will prohibit open grazing nationwide. And the aim is, of course, to resolve this long-standing conflicts between herders and farmers. But I think what really stood out for me was the fact that, they're raising the point, or they're citing the section of the 99 Constitution that provides that every citizen, has the right to move without hindrance, and specifically maintaining that the cattle routes that obviously begin from the far north and end in Lokaja doesn't extend all the way to the south. So there's that conversation, that's, I guess, argument, them trying to decide exactly how it's going to pan out. But while majority of the supporters, of course, of the lawmakers supported the bill, the Senate president argued against, the proposed provision that the ranches should only be established in the header state of origin, and that in itself is what led to the debate. I wonder what the two of you think about this particular bill.
First is to applaud what the senator from Benue State, has done with this bill. Is long overdue, is needed, but I think that it probably will require some tweaking along the line, especially at the third reading and then before it gets passed as a bill. I'm not so sure if a commission is needed to play the role that it's asking for, to form a whole new commission just for that, for animals boundary, for, ranches, etc., is like returning to the not so good days of the Orosanye reports that we are trying, to work on. You'll be talking DGs, you'll be talking, different stuff. I think that there can be a unit under the Ministry of Agri, for example, or something, around that you can work with. Well, in terms of the spirit and the letter of that bill, fantastic. And I like, except for, what was worrisome, and we discussed it, off air briefly, was what Senator Lalong, was trying to do, that maybe Aliero, for example, maybe a few other people from the north who feel that a cow is akin to a citizen of Nigeria, which will be strange. I'm not sure what the argument that Senator Lalong was trying to put out there, but I think that such argument should be shut down because it makes no sense whatsoever. Have ranches. People have proposed cattle colonies in the past, and this is not new. This is something that we have done before when we're in regional, arrangements, for government, and therefore, this bill deserves all the support. Again, as I said, a bit of tweaking here and there. And I think, again, it shows the clear sort of difference between the government of Buhari and the type of legislature that he had, and then the government of Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu and the type of legislature that he has. And it's very clear what the direction will be. And I think that direction that Senator Sam is proposing should be applauded and encouraged.
Definitely. Now, I think that Senator Lalong was pointing out the ECOWAS rules
Of free movement and property.
Yes, but it also allows for open grazing, and people have also spoken about how these ECOWAS rules also affect the investment into modern ranching and modern cattle rearing in our country. But again, it is important for a senator, especially a legislature, to say that if we're making laws, we should make sure it does not necessarily go against other things that we are signatories of, such as the ECOWAS agreement. However, I do completely agree what Senator Zam is doing should be commended. I also think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that the cattle ranches end in Lokoja, because they have been cattle. It doesn't. And
in Ekiti, in other places,
Edo State, we have seen
right.
cattle come much more further down south. So I do think that some of the senators are maybe the misnomer or misspeaking or misrepresenting how much it is. They are trying to paint it as a more clear-cut north versus south issue, but that is not the case. Exactly. And we have seen in the last month, there have been reports that over 50 farmlands have been destroyed in Plateau State and in Kaduna. Our food basket, we're food insecure as a nation. So it is a critical situation, and this is a critical time for us to, come to this bill. But again, we'll discuss this much more, I'm sure, later on the show with our guest.
The Committee on Agriculture, Judiciary and Legal Matters to be reverted back in 4 weeks, and see what happens then.
We'll see what happens. Well, now on to our next story. The Kaduna State House of Assembly has recommended that the immediate past governor of the state, Nasir El-Rufai, and other indicted members of his cabinet be prosecuted for an alleged abuse of office and money laundering within the period he was governor. The lawmakers accuse the El-Rufai administration of siphoning a total of 423 billion naira. Arise correspondent Nisi Gabriel reports.
The entrance of the Speaker of the House, Yusuf Liman, commences the start of the day's plenary activity. The committee is set up to investigate all finances, loans and contracts awarded under the previous administration is set to present its report. From its findings, the chairman of the committee says most of the loans obtained under El-Rufai's administration were not used for the purpose for which they were obtained, while in most cases, due process was not followed in securing the loans.
That the governor of Kaduna State, between 29 May 2015 to 29 May 2023, as the chief executive officer of the state, breached his oath of office contained in the 7th schedule to the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended, and failed to exercise due diligence in the administration of the state, thereby indulged in plunging the state into unwarranted, unjustified, and fraudulent domestic and foreign debts over and above the total loans obtained by Kaduna State since 1965 to 1999, and majority of which were obtained without due process, number two, reckless awards of contracts without due process and due execution, leading to several abandoned projects despite payments.
After receiving the report, the Speaker of the House of Assembly mentioned that a total of 423 billion naira was allegedly siphoned by the previous El-Rufai administration.
The committee found devious transactions, suspicious transaction, diversion, directly or indirectly, through different accounts by using special SPV account to siphon some of or most of all these monies extracted from same statement of account of various individuals, companies were detected. Honorable members, the liability, the contractual liability was 311 billion. Then money siphoned or diverted 423 billion. A case study, in 50 days, a travel agency was paid 1.3 billion naira.
The speaker stated that when Nasir El-Rufai assumed office as governor, the state had no domestic debt, but under his administration, the state's domestic debt soared to over 20 billion naira. Additionally, the committee found that contractors were paid more than what was originally agreed upon or approved by consultants, and some of these projects remain abandoned.
All domestic loans and foreign obtained by the Kaduna State government between 2019 May 2015 to 2019 May 2020 and found by the committee to have been obtained without due process are not binding on the state, and the state government should henceforth stop honoring all obligation arising from them. That the listed contractors should refund the Kaduna State government the total of 36 billion 351 million 126,811 naira 65 kobo, being money paid for work either not done, overpayment, or diversion as follows.
The committee further suggested the urgent suspension of Shiza Bada, the Commissioner of Finance for Kaduna State, who previously held the same position under El-Rufai's administration, along with the chairman of the State Universal Basic Education Board. It also proposed a comprehensive investigation into certain key officials from the previous administration by relevant law enforcement and anti-corruption agencies. Nisi Gabriel, Arise News, Kaduna.
Not surprising there with the comments that we saw going between Liman, the Speaker of the House of Assembly in Kaduna, and Honorable Bello El-Rufai previously. Before this announcement was made, I think that people were expecting that this type of announcement was coming. My issue here is that I want to know a lot of the members of the State House of Assembly currently in Kaduna were in the State House of Assembly during El-Rufai's tenure. A lot of members of the Uba Sani government were part of El-Rufai's governor, including the deputy governor. Hadiza Barabe was El-Rufai's deputy and is Uba Sani's deputy. Uba Sani was a member of El-Rufai's team. He even argued for El-Rufai's loans and bills in the National Assembly and supported him in the media. So now for me, this seems a bit bizarre. Coming off the fact that you have supported this man's actions, you have supported the loans, you have actually supported basically everything he has done in his political life, in your own political career, up until this point, and then now saying that there were misappropriations of funds, that there was corruption, that this is unchecked, to the point of even naming his media aide in part of this inquiry. I find it highly bizarre by the Kaduna State House of Assembly and by the governor of Kaduna, because if this investigation, if this truly has been corruption or these allegations are true, then I believe it's going to reach them as well. Those investigating, it's very hard to believe that their hands are clean. If they say that El-Rufai's hands are dirty, that the El-Rufai administration was corrupt, then these people who are now a member of Uba Sani's administration do have a lot to answer for, I believe.
When you think about it like that, I think maybe that's why we're seeing this recommendation for the suspension of certain members of, certain members of his team that were on there. But, what I really want to focus on is El-Rufai's response, because, since this has happened, there's been a lot of people wondering, okay, what's going to happen? What's he going to say? This ad hoc committee that was set up by the Kaduna State House of Assembly to investigate all finances, all loans and contracts that were awarded in his regime while he was the sitting governor. But his response so far has been, I've not gotten a copy of this, of these findings, and until I find the copy and I'm able to go through it, then I can give a proper response. I do know that they also reached out to members of his team, including even Muyiwa Adeke and even Jimmy Lawal, and then his finance minister, to come and almost finance commissioner, to come and defend some of these contracts, some of these things that were awarded. In certain situations, we're seeing that some of these contracts were actually paid 100% upfront, even before before it actually started. There are some on there that there are claims that were not completed properly. So these, like all of these allegations at this point, really just want to find out exactly what's going on. I mean, it's been out for over 24 hours now. I'm hoping that before the week starts, we're able to find out what's really, because I believe that, like you just described, they seem to be very good friends. So why wasn't this conversation maybe had before, trying to understand what's happened? What really is going on in Kaduna State?
That is going on. Anytime that El-Rufai shows his hands that he's interested in the political future of the country, he will have this type of problem. And this cannot be, may not be unconnected with 2027 and beyond. And this was analyzed it, fairly well. Everybody that is shouting ole, ole, ole on El-Rufai now were part of the team. They were part of the Alibaba, and this is not to exonerate El-Rufai, but this is to say that, it shouldn't be from you. And if you proceed with this, then we will unearth a lot more than you think, will just nail El-Rufai, But of course, it is interesting. It is interesting because you can't deny the fact that El-Rufai is a powerful, influential persona, but his woes have been plenty. Since he was nominated to be the minister, he would have been the minister of power, by the way, But of course, we know the powerful enemies that he has, the same sort of role that he has played, against some other people in the past. He will deal with this issue. He will respond appropriately, but then maybe it's not 100% clean. This, for me, should just throw light on the rot that may be in Kaduna State. And this is not just about El-Rufai. It's also about, the current governor. It's also about the members of the National Assembly. But we'll see how this goes.
Definitely, definitely.
All right, we move on very quickly. And that's the much we can take from the week that was. But before we get to our first guest, let's quickly run through a couple of news items making the rounds today, starting with this one, that the United Nations has added Israel and its military to a list of states committing violations against children. The move comes after more than 8 months of war on Gaza, during which 15,000 children are estimated to be among the more than 36,000 killed in Israeli attacks on the Palestinian territory. The annual list by the UN Secretary General covers the killing of children in conflict and denial of access to aid and targeting of schools and hospitals. While it is not clear which violations the Israeli army is accused of committing, thousands of children have been killed in Israel's campaign against Hamas in Gaza, and thousands more in desperate need of humanitarian assistance.
Well, Donald Trump has taken part in his first campaign rally since his criminal conviction for fraud a week ago. Addressing a cheering crowd in a megachurch in Phoenix, in the swing state of Arizona, he said that his crime was out of control because of what he called an invasion of criminal gangs. He said that crime, my apologies, is out of control because of an invasion of criminal gangs across the United States southern border with Mexico. Just last week, Mr. Trump was convicted in New York of falsifying business papers to hide a payment of hush money to a porn star. He said it was a fabricated trial.
Meanwhile, Vice President Kashim Shettima has commissioned a house designated as his next official residence, saying it is in fulfillment of the Tinubu administration's promises to Nigerians to complete inherited projects. Shettima noted that it is in the government's best interest, as well as that of the public, to ensure that projects are completed. The vice president stated that abandoning projects after spending heavy amounts to a huge waste of the nation's resources.